This is Global Order. I'm Hindol Sengupta. Dr. Gautam Sen is joining me from London today to discuss what interesting Olympics opening ceremony we saw. Many called it crass, grotesque, against every idea of what an Olympics opening ceremony should be. Parts of it, of course. I love the Celine Dion part, but many other parts, including that horrible ending with the Last Supper, a mockery of the Last Supper, and other things. Something is going on there culturally in France. Something very, very interesting, which has deeper ramifications in many parts of the world apart from France. To discuss this, Dr. Gautam Sen. Dr. Sen, thank you.
Thank you for asking me.
Dr. Sen, let me begin by asking you, when you saw this really, some would say bizarre, some would say grotesque, parts of the French Olympics opening show, what were your first reactions?
Well, definitely bizarre and grotesque. I mean, one was a bit gobsmacked as to what it was all about. And then, of course, I grasped what they were trying to do. But, we must bear in mind that France is the original anti-clerical republic. So there are obviously many people in French society and intelligentsia who take all this very lightly. But it has caused a great deal of offense to many. And I think in terms of being crude, it really was over the top. So even I was very uncomfortable considering that, the Last Supper was being mocked in this way. So they had well-deserved hostility from social media. But it actually indicates something larger that has been unfolding for now quite some time.
Do that in just a moment, but I want to, because I want you to delve onto that, but I just wanted to stay with your initial thoughts for a moment. Yes, it is true that the French Republic is the original sort of, anti-clerical republic, as you called it. It has a long tradition of satire against religion. It has a long tradition of extremely, some would say, over-the-top sexualization of its public life. All of this is true. But there are two questions to ask, though. Was it appropriate on an Olympic opening stage? That's number one. Number two, you can do this even today at the heart of Europe with all its conflict and fissures. But remember, it was done in Paris, the same city where a minor, small little magazine putting up a few cartoons about another religion landed up with 12 people murdered in Paris and riots and murders around the world. There's a dichotomy there.
The instinct, being a good Bengali Bhadralok, is to say we should be somewhat mindful about people's sensitivities. But actually, that would be the wrong approach to have. And in a way, this spectacle, which actually I still think was inappropriate for the Olympic venue, most of all, was actually an indirect assertion of liberty, which was so grievously challenged by the Charlie Hebdo massacre. In a way, what they're saying that we are not going to respect people's religious sensitivities. And there is another group which is also extremely offended from very little. So this actually is an underlying issue that we will cause offense to anybody and everybody, and including the people who are apt to be extremely offended and react violently. So there is a connection with Charlie Hebdo, an indirect and subtle connection. But I will still say I found it rather appalling. But there we are. Not the end of the world.
But this is a very, very, very important point, Dr. Sen. I want to stay here for just a moment. Absolutely. I completely agree with you. And I thought that myself, that this is essentially France saying we will not take any challenge to our fundamental principle, which is we will cause offense, we will mock institutions, we will mock religion, and that's the way it is. But the same far left, or the left in France that asserts these values, would not, if France is truly an amalgam of many faiths and cultures today, it would not dare to do this with any other culture, with any other faith. That's my point.
Well, there is only one group which will react in a way that causes fear, and that is everywhere. As I said in an earlier podcast, we already have blasphemy laws because of self-censorship. So France is no exception, but it is a ringing declaration of the primacy of liberty of thought. But we can still feel a bit squeamish about it all. But on reflection, in a sense, what they're doing is an affirmation of Enlightenment values. The original nation of the Enlightened, they are reaffirming that, which actually was against the church, liberty against church control. So in a way, we are talking about a deeply ingrained libertarian intellectual culture, which is not merely something which the elite share. It is much more widely shared amongst the ordinary people instinctively, even if they are not giving it active intellectual reflection. They know and they like. And yes, France is a place where you can get away with much more than you could in virtually any other European country or indeed the United States. And certainly you couldn't get away with anything like this in India. But
certainly, even in France, even after Charlie Hebdo, you would not be able to do this, and let's face the elephant in the room. Even 5% of this kind of sort of irreverence could not be shown to Islam, for instance.
But there is a certain change in the air across Europe. I constantly see pictures of this man, I think in Sweden, burning a copy of the Quran, which was unheard of. And I believe the Danish courts have forbidden this in Denmark. I believe that is the country where. So there is now resistance and pushback to the belligerent assertion of primacy and the sanctity of Islam. A lot of people are now seeing this not as a one-off issue which can be ignored, but a challenge to the basic identity of European society. And now there are mosques being shut in Berlin, and very harsh action in Austria. Poles and Hungarians have, of course, been doing all sorts of things for a long time. And the Hungarians are prepared to lose €1 million a day in fines to assert their autonomy in this regard. So there are some winds of change. I will add, with the exception of the United Kingdom, and the new elections have reaffirmed the fear and anxiety of the political establishment. And if you may give me a moment to give you an example which I don't think anybody else have understood. Sadiq Khan, who has now been re-elected for the third time as mayor of London, whom I keep describing as the canniest politician in Britain, and I mean the most canny of any politician in any political party. His sophistication as operator is nonpareil. He is not a candidate of the Labour Party. He is a candidate of the British political intelligence establishment and the intelligence services. Let me go back for one moment to explain why. When the IRA bombed the City of London, Blair moved very quickly in the direction of the Friday Accord to reach some kind of understanding. A threat to the London city, the City of London, and the heart of the financial markets was considered too great because the City of London is the source of 1/3 of British tax revenue. So they sued for peace. This is why they also put up the congestion charge zone where every single vehicle is photographed. This was, as a friend of mine doing research found out, partly motivated by security concerns, not simply by a desire to control the flow of traffic. They have chosen Sadiq Khan to be mayor by putting up very ineffective candidates against him, candidates who have no chance of defeating him, including the last one who actually was a Harrow councillor in the borough where I live. These people have no chance. Of course, there's a huge voting constituency of ethnic minorities who vote for him, including Hindus. And he has the support of the most prominent Hindu leader in the UK, very close to the government of India, who has publicly supported him. But anyway, why do they want Sadiq Khan? Sadiq Khan was the second most important lawyer for all terror accused, apart from a man called Imran Khan. So Sadiq Khan has very good associations with terror accused, though he's only been their lawyer, nothing more. And they feel that these people will be more reluctant to attack the city of Sadiq Khan. So Sadiq Khan appointment as mayor and repeated re-election was an act of self-preservation for the UK. And let me just throw in one little vignette. There was one candidate who would have been a formidable opponent. The first one, of course, was that famous chap who's now the peer in the House of Lords. His name escapes me for a moment. I actually campaigned for him. But the other one, last time, not this last recent one, is a man called Rory Stewart, a rather formidable man from the armed services who was a minister in the Cameron government, very effective and much liked and highly regarded. He withdrew. I feel he was advised to withdraw. So this is how important the threat of Islam is seen by the establishment. So that is why they are not prepared to take it on. And what I have just read yesterday, the Labour government is getting ready to repeal an act which was due to come into effect, which is the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act of 2023, which required, under the pain of penalty, universities and student unions to allow freedom of speech. The Labour government is going to repeal this act very shortly. They are frightened that people will say things which are dangerous and will be offending people who are even more dangerous. So there we are. But maybe
that's all of this is, of course, interesting you're talking today, because all of this has been seen in the in how the Manchester police rushed to apologize to people who created riotous conditions and attacked policemen. And in that apology, didn't even bother to mention not a single word about their own colleagues who had been injured.
That was a serious anomaly. Of course, beating up on a suspect is neither legal nor moral. That nobody can dispute. But now the video of the attack on the police before this happened is circulating. 3 of them were hospitalized, and 1 woman police officer had her nose broken. Now, I can well understand that if one of your women colleagues is bleeding to the nose, you might lose good sense and might just have a red veil overtake you. So I understand, wrong though it was, that once he saw his colleague bleeding, and being a woman colleague, he got completely out of control. But there's another video circulating where a security officer is being kicked in the head again and again. I believe in Leeds, by a group of Muslims. And not one kick, but again and again. That did not cause any controversy. So there we have it. And part of the reason for the reaction of the establishment was about the demonstrations outside the Manchester police headquarters. I think that gave them a fright. And like the police in much of India and Calcutta, they always feel riots are more expensive than giving in. And I can see the point they make, that a huge riot by tens of thousands is much more costly in every possible way than conceding So this is what has happened in Manchester
This
too.
is, of course, setting the precedences that it is. But let's go back to France. You wanted to make a larger point about the ceremony and what it depicted in terms of cultural change, not just in France, but perhaps across the Western world.
I think what we need to pause on is the woke phenomenon and try to understand it. Wokeism actually has spread worldwide, and it is coming to India, and is apparently having an impact on our Supreme Court justices as well, who are uttering some rather wokish sentiments, for example, on the issue of transgender marriage. So it has come to India too. It just shows how potent global communications are and how potent are cultural influences for people across the world, regardless of where they originate. This is a cause for alarm, and I'll come back to that. You see, basically, the woke phenomenon needs to have a much deeper understanding. People have not understood where it comes from. The basis of this is the post-modernist revolution, which goes back to the 60s. The revolution fueled by a host of leading, particularly French intellectuals, Foucault, Jacques Derrida, Lyotard, and a galaxy of stars, and of course, the American philosopher Richard Rorty, in which the basis of foundational values that transcend time and space were challenged by this new philosophical view of relativism, that nothing had intrinsic merit, nothing was a priori to the human experience, and therefore all kinds of human experience had their inherent legitimacy, and none was superior to the other in terms of any prior philosophical basis. So this is what has been coursing through the political and social culture of Western civilization, that there are no foundational values. Anything goes. This is the basis of the revolt against the Enlightenment, which was just reasserted in the Olympics. So this was a revolt against the Enlightenment. The most important intellectual start to this actually is an important and difficult book to read, The Dialectic of the Enlightenment by Horkheimer and Theodor Adorno, where if you read the very first chapters, they accuse reason of abandoning our symbols and ideas of the past, which according to them have a role to play in human history, and pure reason led to the death camps. So in a way, wokeism, which actually was a product of thinkers of the Frankfurt School, of which people like Adorno were very much a part, but wokeism actually is something more, and a very fundamental difference between the pseudo-Marxist woke phenomenon, and really it is not Marxist in my opinion at all, and the Frankfurt School postmodernist modernism is that the woke people reject pluralism. They are the masters of the cancel culture. They are not asserting the validity of opinions and relative ideas. They are asserting only they have the right to speak, and others are sinners. They are committing grave sin. That is why wokeism actually is a re-emergence of Christianity, of good and evil. The world is now black and white, and that is what wokeism represents. And many people, for psychosociological reasons, have fallen prey to this because Western society has lost its anchor because there are no foundational values. And many, many movements and protests have jumped on this bandwagon, whether it's the Black Lives Matter or Palestine, everything goes. And the young who have no foundational values, who cannot think deeply about the long term and existential issues, they are very vulnerable to being persuaded to pick up the cudgels on behalf of new issues, of which Black Lives Matter in Palestine are very important examples, because universities around the world now have adopted the Palestinian cause very uncritically, in my opinion, and for a very simple reason. One, there is no war in which there are no civilian casualties. And in the case of Gaza, civilian casualties were unavoidable because it's a compact space, and the Hamas fighters were hiding among the civilians. This much is clear. And again, it's a compact space, so there was not a lot of space to hide in. So if you say do not attack Hamas, you're saying do not. If you're saying do not attack civilians, that means you're saying do not attack Hamas. You've got to leave them alone. There is no other way of dealing with Hamas except causing civilian casualties. So that's the first thing. And there is no war in which civilians have not been killed in large numbers. This actually is about 38,000, which is, really, tragic, and one balks at the sight of children, babies. I mean, this is intolerable. But bear in mind, the war in Iraq cost 2 million Iraqi lives, 2 million. Tens of thousands of children died in hospitals because of the American embargo on medicines and medical equipment. I'm not citing this to justify Gaza. I'm just indicating the harsh reality. A much more cynical issue that you have to bear in mind, a cynical issue, is Hamas and many people who are radical Sunnis consider dying in this way, even for children, martyrdom, and politically very, very desirable. They have no empathy for those who are dead, and even the parents are sometimes seem to be saying, my child is a martyr. So do bear in mind, this is a political culture which is very different from that of what we imagine the world is. They are saying these dead babies are martyrs, dying for the cause. You and I might think, my God, this is extraordinary, but this is what they're thinking. They're also thinking this is really scoring them political brownie points. So they are not reacting to their own dead in the way.
I think this is, was it Golda Meir or one of the Israeli heads of state said this, that the big difference is that, our opponents don't care whether, women and children die, whereas we will always care that whether women and children die. And this is a particularly complicated thing. So this is,
just like to interrupt for one moment.
Yeah.
When Western leaders say this, I am suspicious, because this should not become an alibi for killing women and children. And this, for any warring state, is an alibi. So I don't accept that. But I'm just pointing out the complexity of the issues and the fact that Hamas fighters and many of the mothers of dead children are actually saying on live that our children are martyrs, which in Islam means they have died a worthy death, and they are milking it for political capital. None of this is okay, because we as individuals, wherever we are, must assert some foundational values about human life and suffering, no matter where this happens. And I think in our culture, this is a value we must never lose, the culture of the Hindus, Buddhists, and Jains, that this is a fundamental issue, and our wars were never fought, mostly, though not all, to the death, where civilian casualties were irrelevant. Not always, but this was an ethos. So I am not prepared to accept civilian deaths are okay, no matter how the various parties view it. But this is woke culture. But there's something much more interesting. Let me go on.
I want to add something before you go on, which is that the other thing that fascinates and disturbs me is that, in a sense, this is in many ways, socialism, extreme socialism has always had one big enemy. And in my opinion, that enemy, or contrary to popular belief, is not capitalism. That enemy is the institution of the family. Extreme socialism has always hated the family as an institution. Marxist views have always believed that the state is in charge of, people, individuals and children, not the family. This goes against thousands of years of human experience and tradition of the importance of the, of the unit called the family. And I think this is perhaps the most rigorous onslaught that has begun again on the very institution of family, Dr. Sen, at a time when the family is in great peril, also because of the declining fertility rates in most parts of the world. In Europe, it's abysmal. In America, I think it's 1.6. In most parts of the world, fertility rates have fallen to really, extremely worrying levels. And this is a further onslaught to childbearing and the very institution of a two-parent family.
Well, let me just say something about the first point about socialism and the family. The only two ideologies which reject the primacy of the family are Islam and communist parties. And Mao is, of course, the extreme example that your loyalty is to the party. And during the Cultural Revolution, children are betraying their parents and watching them being murdered. So this is very much a communist idea, because your loyalty should be to the community and actually through the party. And Islam also says, ultimately, if your parents, your children are betraying Islam, you sacrifice them. So these are the two ideological movements which are most hostile to the family. Though in practice, of course, the family is very strong in Islam, in practice. So it just shows the inconsistency between faith and hard reality. Now, you said something quite important, so I'll try to divert the discussion a little bit, if I may, and indulge myself. First of all, what you say about demographic crisis, the game is over for Italy, for Russia, Japan, and China. It's over for them, because their population decline is unstoppable, because we already know from how many people have already been born what the trajectory of the population decline is going to be. Catastrophic for Russia, definitely now for China, we are finding out. And the birth strike in China is now, simply gathering pace. People don't want to have children for all sorts of reasons, including the cost of living, housing, etc. But let me say something larger about this phenomenon of the family, to which wokeism has no loyalty either, by the way. You see, the original feminist movement, which came to a peak after the First World War, and finally women won the vote, I think, in the late 1920s in England, these were about fundamental rights. These were about the basic inequality between men and women, voting rights, legal rights, every kind of right in which women were denied equality. Of course, in my view, this was also a mistake, because there cannot be symmetric equality between asymmetric individuals, and women certainly are asymmetric under certain circumstances when they are carrying and when they're looking after children, because they will do that for at least 2 years from conception to birth. So they should be more than equality. They should be extremely generous privileges. And some of that is there, I think, in places like Scandinavia and elsewhere in terms of maternity leave and all that. But, equality, I suppose was the only option as a slogan to justify yourself. But then something very dramatic happened. We need to understand this, to understand the demographic crisis. After the Second World War, there was a huge shortage of labor. Everywhere. If you look at the data in the United States, Europe, many men had died. In Russia, 30 million people plus had died. So women who were in the labor force during the war in big numbers and demonstrated that they could run machinery and do hard work, which doesn't surprise me at all. And the more I see Indian women on the media, the more terrifying I find their competence, that how skilled and clever they all are. So this is no surprise that women can do most things. There's a few things that women can't do, but it's not true that men are stronger, in my opinion. Men have great strength for a short period. Great strength over a long period requires you to carry an 8-pound load in your stomach. That requires real stamina and strength. Ask a man to carry a 7-pound load on his belly for 8-9 months and see how strong they feel. So this strength argument also is a bit unclear. What do you mean by strength? So leave that aside. But after the war, women had to come to the labor force, period. And it liberated women, because obviously women having money in their pocket gave them more opportunities, as is right. Birth control was also a product of this. Because you cannot have women in the workforce getting pregnant and unable to control. So this business of women in the labor force and women being able to control how many children is the bedrock of the demographic crisis. Because for the individual capitalist, it doesn't matter what happens to society at large. For the individual capitalist, you're looking at your balance sheet. And if the balance sheet is being impacted by a shortage of labor, You will recruit. You're not going to say, oh, I won't recruit so many women because there'll be a demographic crisis in 20 years' time. If you did that, your company profits would fall and somebody would take your company over. So private capitalists cannot be worried about these larger social issues about demography. So they recruit. Exactly what's happening in Germany, where only 200,000 of the million people came from Syria working. But the capitalists don't care about that. For them, 200,000 is a gain. The remaining 800,000 are being paid for by welfare from taxes, not by them. So for capitalism to function in the context of labor shortage is a no-no. And that is where the demographic crisis originates. That women at work automatically means the options of having 3, 4, 5 children are limited. You really can't do that, particularly in professional jobs. And also, birth control was an absolute necessity for that. So, I would say to the feminists, you've somewhat been taken for a ride. You have also been used because despite their greater ability to control their lives, and which really only means money. If you have money in your pocket, you have control, which is why I say, yes, women should definitely go out to work. But their fate as women still remains very appalling. Women face a lot of social, psychological, physical violence. And if you look at the data, it is still shocking. And I always say to my women friends, you talk about equality. In India, if I could hear that adult women are no longer being slapped by their relations, I will say that it is big progress. Slapping of an adult woman by their relatives is uncommon. It's common. It happens all the time in many parts of India. Less in Bhadralok, Bengal. That's why we are unfamiliar. But so I always say if that stops, I would say, my God, we have made a lot of progress. So women have a really raw deal even now, despite the fact that they're working.
This is true. I mean, you'll be surprised, how many women I have known who have mentioned in conversations that in some relationship or the other, and this is women in their 20s, 30s, late 30s, in some relationship or the other, and I'm not talking about their parents or relatives, but in some relationship or the other, some man has raised their hand on, and I find it shocking. Like you said, perhaps the class milieu that we come from, we are not familiar with this, but you're right. I mean, this is astonishingly and horrifyingly common even today, and it is one of the most perverse things I have ever heard. And clearly, from your reaction, you think it's a terribly perverse thing. But you're absolutely right. I wonder why this happens and why people take it and empowered women take it.
But there is also something more, which any woman would recognize, is that the way bullying and verbal abuse, and I have seen verbal abuse of a woman, I've seen with my own eyes, with the man's face 6 inches from the woman's face, shouting at her. No hand raised. But I was watching and I was thinking, if somebody did that to me, I'm a man, I would be a bit intimidated. I would be scared if that guy was bigger than me. And this guy was obviously bigger than the woman. So there's a lot of this stuff going on. And this is very constraining from a woman's freedom, because she would automatically not do things she wants because she fears it might offend her partner or her father-in-law or even father. So let's forget about all this. We have a very, very long way to go. But what I would say, we must create social systems to which capitalists are obliged to adapt, because individually they can't do that. The market does not allow the individual capitalist to go out on a limb and make special provisions for women. But if it's a rule-based system which everybody obeys, and the most important of this, small thing, it will not be enough, is to make creches compulsory over time in every workplace.
Yes,
and to allow
completely
women
agree.
and allow every woman who's working to be able to visit their child in a break and creche. And if need be, the state should subsidize this from taxes. I'm not saying every private company pay 100%, but this is a cost society must bear through the total output it generates, because otherwise we are finished. Because it's not that people may or may not want to have children. It will be very difficult for practical reasons. And look at what's happening for high flyers. People are saying, why are there not more women in boardrooms in America? Because there's so many women graduates, because women dominate now the arts and even STEM areas in terms of
In India, women are overwhelmingly the best performers in STEM at the high school level.
But then you say, why are they not in the boardrooms? people say discrimination. I think the story is more complicated. Many women in their 30s suddenly think, I'm never going to be able to have children. And I hate this life. And this life is not good. To do a 60-hour week, 50-hour week is not pleasant, you see. I met a young woman the other day, a topper from Warwick, who's about to start with Boston Consulting. And I was astonished. This 22-year-old says, I only don't want to work for money. I want to have a life. That's why I don't want to be in finance. So she had it figured. So, unless you treat your women fairly and with careful thought, society is going to commit suicide. And wokeism is merely a symptom. Now, let me come to India.
So this is the point, Dr. Sen. On top of all this, the woke assault is an added assault amidst this already ongoing crisis. It's the final nail on the coffin of traditional society. And by traditional society, I mean two-parent family society. Wokeism is one more, perhaps the final grave assault.
Wokeism is made possible by the fact that you are working and you can't really have a proper family life. The data shows 40% of women below 35 in America will be unmarried by 2030, childless and unmarried. So this is spreading, and the replacement ratio is 2.2. So even 2 children is not enough. I hardly know a middle-class woman of my children's generation who's married, Bengali, not one. I'm shocked that every single one is unmarried. They're in their early 30s, and they all say, we have no interest in marriage. They have good careers, they're getting ahead. So this is not simply an individual choice. You create the framework within choices are made. And I think you made it very difficult. And the only thing I would say, do not use this as an excuse for not letting women work. Because unfortunately, we live in a world, if you have no money in the bank, you're vulnerable. And you will be treated badly by somebody or the other. So women really need to work, and they're good at it, as we are finding out. And I've been telling you how formidable our business journalists are on TV, how terrific and intelligent they are, what a pleasure it is for me to watch them. I won't name them and embarrass them, but I watch all of their, and they're better than the men. They really know their stuff. So let me now come to one thing about India. All of these woke issues, enlightenment issues, are highly ideological. And their ideological perspective on human life is binary. This is the key. They have a binary black and white, which is a biblical concept, which is why I say woke has somehow found its way into Christianity. They are a Christian organization because they really say good and evil when they attack you. When J.K. Rowling, the second wealthiest woman writer worth more than $1 billion, is stopped from giving lectures and having her honors withdrawn. And my God, she's a brave woman. Okay, she has the money to be braver than most. When that happens, it indicates this is not about a debate. It is not about a pluralist society where we disagree with each other, where we want to convince each other. We want to cancel people with whom we disagree because you're evil. You're a sinner. There is no place for a sinner. And this is what's happening. This is called binary cultures. We were never a binary culture. Our greatest strength, that society is mainly gray. At the end of that gray rainbow, there is something white and resplendent, but you never quite get there. Life is about striving to get closer, and maybe that white light moves away as you approximate, because enlightenment and all of that is a constantly evolving idea. So our binary culture, our culture is becoming binary. This is the deadliest thing for us, which is why I like the fact that a lot of people now are saying what I've been saying, we are not secular, we are plural. Secular is a very loaded anti-Hindu concept. It's become a weapon to beat Hindus with.
It's the most interesting thing. I mean, the greatest, sort of contemporary movement which claims to thrive in non-binariness, so to speak. That's why LGBTQI, whatever, all the alphabets of all the letters in the alphabet, that movement is actually preaching a very binary view of the world. The contradiction cannot be more stark.
These things are not mutually consistent with each other. Their views often are inconsistent. That's why they can say we want to admit everybody, and then they won't if you don't agree with them. So this is, this is what human beings are like. I think we're all a bit like that for some of our lives. So I'm not particularly bothered about that. I'm bothered about the fact that our plural, non-binary conception of life, which makes for greater social peace, is being undermined. And that's why I worry that our most educated group of people, the Supreme Court judges, are buying into this. We should resist this completely. Transgenders are amongst our gods and goddesses long before these people discovered it. Our gods and goddesses have transgender identities. We accept everybody. And I used to say to Baba Ramdev, who wanted to cure homosexuality, I used to say to Baba Ramdev ji, please simply leave it alone. Just leave it alone. Let them endure. It doesn't have to be a public spectacle that you are gay. It's a private matter, like romance and affection. But people were not that bothered. I remember growing up in Benares in the 60s and being rather surprised to see so many teenagers and men walking hand in hand. In Europe, that would have been thought of as gay. But men used to walk actually hand in hand. This is not uncommon in many parts of India. So I say our great strength to teach the world is to be tolerant, to accept all sorts of bizarre, inconsistent things which don't, because we accept fundamentally, because of our conception of the world, our philosophical view, that we live in a complicated world where everything is not so clear and there is no good and evil. That is why there is no punishment for blasphemy. In Hinduism, we are told there is blasphemy, by the way, in Hinduism. There are passages which, because we should defend ourselves when we attack politically, I agree with that. But there is no punishment for that. What you're enjoined to do is to try harder next time. That's what my parents used to say. Try harder next time. We're not going to cut you off and we're not going to do Sartan se Juda. I've seen a 14-year-old boy in Iraq being beheaded because he was listening to music when he should have been at prayer. It's on the net. He was beheaded. He was 14 years old. So this is the end product of a binary conception of world. You get harder and harder and more things are unacceptable, which is why Pakistan is in so much trouble. Because once they eliminated the minorities, they had to discover true Islam. And discovering true Islam is not an easy game. You've got to eliminate your enemies.
As such, binary cultures always finally turn upon themselves, because at one point, you eliminate the minorities, you eliminate other people, and then there's nobody left to eliminate, so you turn on yourself.
No, you are looking still for pure Islam. That is what the struggle culturally is on about. In Pakistan, you're looking for true Islam, and they're all denouncing each other. Forget about the Ahmadiyas and Shias. That's an old story. But even among the Sunni groups, they have a lot of disputes. And then they have disputes about the practice, even if they're close on other issues. So this is not the way human beings can live, because we will never disagree with each other on everything. We will always disagree. But the main trick in our civilization and our politicians sometimes say that, "Jhagda karo, maka sham ke aake ek saath baith ke khana hai." That is a wonderful way of putting it.
Let's end this wonderful conversation, Dr. Sen, by going back to Europe. And going back to the Olympic ceremony and its conclusion, where we began this conversation. Some people have pointed out, and I read this wonderful article in somebody had written in the Spectator, in fact, in the UK, that in fact what we saw, those grotesque parts, so to speak, of the ceremony, were actually not even French. It was the bringing across the ocean of American extreme binary culture upon European shores. Even the Europeans wouldn't really or don't really think like this. This is an American culture which always sees this, angels and devils, black and white kind of culture, which is what, as you were explaining, the woke culture is, and that is now seep in. As we come to the end of this conversation, talk a little bit about this idea.
Well, you could get away with this in anti-clerical republic in France. In England, the organizers would have vetoed it. So still, it was done in France because there was less of a hostile reaction from the organizers. In many other places, I think the organizers would have quickly declined to accept that. But in my old age, I'm learning. Partly because I talk to people like you and others, to dig deeper, there is often a commercial motive to such displays. there is some commercial motive which may only affect a small number of people, or it may affect a larger number. So there is often commerce involved in such innocuous, garish displays. Somebody is going to make money out of this. So who knows? There is hope for humanity yet, because people are running after money as much as they're running after woke displays.
There is finally hope in profit and the profit motive. Dr.
Yes.
Sen, this has been, as always, an extremely enlightening and an extremely delightful conversation. I thank you for your time, for taking out time on a Sunday to talk about all these things with us. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Hindol. Thank you very much.